Hello and welcome to Sim.bc, where right now is 10 past 1 in the morning and I'm joining you as per usual with a cup of green, because think about that environment, think green. Am I right? Green shirt. All is fine, good and dandy. However, action. We're going to speak about action because that is the first genre that we're going to tackle in this little project of ours. And in order to do so, I have prepared 5 questions that I'm going to ask each and every single genre in this project. Action is not going to be any different. In order to do so, I've made some pre-made questions. I have them down here, which might be why I'm looking down an awful lot throughout this video. And these are going to be things spanning everywhere from how would I come to decide the perspective of a character in general terms, because we can't go too specific in a video within itself, right? Otherwise we would need to have an action genre question 1 video that is sort of, 1 hour long. So that's obviously not what we're gonna do, but we're just gonna move through them 1 to 5 and then sort of give a satisfying conclusion in the end. Is there something that I would have any enjoyment on, which is sort of question number 5. I know, spoilers. Anyway though, without any further ado, let's get into the questioning. Now, the first question is very much character focused, and that is, and I quote, how would I, me as I, let's say, go about designing the scope of the characters, and what would the main character gravitate towards? Now, what I would probably do is look at the genre of action. If I were to write a story, I would probably put the context of action into war or a skirmish between 2 different factions, or 2 different, perhaps even more, 2 or 3 or 4 5 6 different factions, and let them battling it out and really much be focusing on the battlefield, right? So in order to think about that, in order to truly think about the battlefield, how would I propose the character to be? Would they be in a group, or would they be an individual traveling throughout this world? Now, I would imagine myself putting the character in a group, but being very heavily focused on a lonesome and individualistic approach to the story. Which means that even though they might be placed into a squad, maybe they're placed into a platoon, to an entire regiment, or whatever you want to say, or if they're just a mercenary coming there, they're going to be surrounded by people. But since it's war, I would probably like to emphasize the point that people in wars, especially a couple of years back, right, 1,000 years ago, people were just slaughtered in wars like trash. And I would like to present that point of view and my point of view on war and how it's actually carried over to this day. Which means that the character that might be in a group will still feel very and truly alone, because they are on a battlefield. The constant threat of the enemy forces, the constant threat of, well, their friends and foes alike for that matter, being slain and tossed away and dealt with as trash, and really sort of emphasize the point that if that is happening around you, then you will probably feel truly alone. And I would imagine myself feeling like that if I were posed in a situation where I see my friends and comrades fall around me. I would probably feel very alone and have a very hard time actually, what you would say, connect and dealing with a group of people, and have an equally as hard time sort of connecting to those people. Why? What is probably the bias, the reason, so to say, for why when you have a character you want to write as a loner, so to say, you generally make them have a scarred past. And this entire story that I probably would adapt to if I were to write an action within the action genre would probably be establishing that tragic backstory, but fleshing it out and having that as an entire book, as an entire story, however you want to see it. Now, moving on to the second question then, which I think is a really interesting question, thank you very much. What would be the geographical confinement of the story? Now, this is something that I believe most authors overlook. And I'm by no means an expert on the subject, by the way, so I'm just talking out to my butt, so to say. I'm just looking at speculations on what I believe to be true. But when I read a lot of books, it feels like the author has started off writing about the specific, what you would say, specific little place. and then they feel the need to expand the world in subsequent books because they told the stories that they wanted to tell in that particular space. Which means that it sort of sometimes feel lacking the connection between the different, the different places where the book takes you. Could be a reason of my poor taste in literature, maybe, that I'm not actually reading the top of the line books where that is not an issue, but for me, the books I read, I sort of see that to be a theme. Not always by any means, but more often than I would be comfortable with. So if I were to describe, so to say, if I were to make my geographical confinement here, I would probably still, even though I mentioned that, look at a battlefield within itself. I would probably kick off the character within battle or in the preparation for battle, and then tell the story of the person in sort of backflashes, flashbacks, yes, that's what you say, in flashbacks. And in order to sort of establish the grander scheme of the world, and in order to describe some form of map and faction value, I would have that be presented through flashbacks of different characters of the enemy faction, either when they're getting captured or when they are about to perish on the battlefield with perhaps with the main character, or just having the main character around at the same time. That will build the, what should we say, geographical confinement and expand it more than the battlefield itself, and it would also provide some form of context to why the battle is actually happening, whereas in the beginning you're just thrown into a battle, and then over the course of the book you will realize why this battle is actually taking place. I think that's an interesting way of going about working with your geographical confinement, but yet again emphasizing the point that we are at a battlefield. Here is where we're actually working. This is all we know, because that's sort of the mindset of the character. If the character is going to be very lonesome, very individualistic, they're probably also going to look at the place where they are as, this is where I am, you know, very grounded character, and that will also reflect how we're actually telling the geographical confinement, while simultaneously leading some, what you would say, some crumbles here and there in order to build off of them if there are subsequent books in the story, if there's subsequent series, if there's subsequent episodes, however you want to tell the story, whichever medium you would like to work with. But you will have some form of trace of, oh, you know, this land of where I am from, and you can then build upon that land, what land were they actually talking about, were their perspective actually faithful to the representation of what it was actually like, so on and so forth, and sort of beginning from one specific point, shoot out in all different directions, sort of crumbles as I said, and then pull back the geographical confinement, sort of expanding it in the same time. I think that's a very interesting way of doing it. Many books probably does it already. It's not an original point of view and idea by any stretch of the imagination, but that's probably how I would go about doing it. Yet again, keeping the emphasis on the battlefield and on the battle itself as a very structured and grounded point in the story. Now, question number 3. What sort of problems / obstacles could I create for the character or characters within this genre? And well, I'm thinking like thematically, because generally you can throw in everything. You can throw in a comedic obstacle, a drama-based tragical obstacle, you can throw in a romantic sort of quote-unquote obstacle, however you want to do it. However, I would like to focus on the genre at hand. So how would I utilize action as a thematic in order to present a problem or an obstacle for the main character to sort of solve and get over? And the way I would probably go about that is either by making the main character get kidnapped in some way, because as the writer of something and as the creator of something, you have full power of how you go about actually putting your main character and other subsequent characters in certain situations. That's probably the best thing about actually writing and creating something. You're sort of the god of the universe. If I want to put my character into confinement, I can do that, and I can write the character into a situation where they will be captured. Now, if they get captured, there are many ways and different manners through escaping. One way could be that this main character needs to actually rely on comrades found in the same place. The comrades might not be from the same faction, but they become sort of, you know, brothers of war, a tug of war, however you want to say it, and that sort of raises more of a group perspective and a group mindset for the main character than his or her own faction has done previous in the book or in the story. I think that would be a very interesting point of view and sort of an interesting perspective to take up, because that also raises the idea that if you're just from a nation, you know, getting back to reality in the world we live in right now, just because you're from a specific nation doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to meet the people that you work the best with from that nation, and sort of introduce the idea of what you say diversification and multinationality, and how that can all work together in order to form the perfect group. Sort of the synchronized figures who all fit together as a puzzle when they get bring together. And while being captured is probably very good in the genre of action, because it could be an action-packed escape, it can also be an action-packed capturing process, and once they get out, it's probably just going to resume to more battle, and you can yet again throw it into, well, action in between the groups. It's sort of a tug of war in between the groups when they're all still sort of loyal towards their factions, but they're not really, because they're all friends. And how are we actually going to go about dealing with this problem? Yet again, introducing drama, comedy, romance, so on and so forth, but probably maybe in a way that stems from action in and within itself. That is the main thematic of the genre that we're working with. So that's probably one of the many obstacles I could produce and present the character with. You could also obviously make it, you know, a huge battalion on the other side of the river seems to crossing over, and they're gonna attack us. That's also sort of a problem that you can present your main character with, but that's sort of more of a problem that you present the entire world within the story with, more than the character itself. So then I would argue that's more of a drama based, how is the character going to respond to the rest of the nation dealing with this problem as it is presented to them, not necessarily the character itself. Maybe that you've thrown in a duelist between, you know, maybe a specific comrade or a rival on either the other side that is attacking or the same side, to see how the two characters play off of each other when they both get attacked. Something like that is just, you know, just brainstorming. Number 4 though. Who would be the intended target audience if I were to write a story within this genre? And I've even written some keywords here for me. Would it be kids, tweens, teens, young adults, or senior citizens? Now, I think that by the way how I look at action, and I tend to gravitate towards a war story, a skirmish story, or a battle story, I would probably roll out kids. The way I would like to write the book would probably roll out tweens as well, because I would like to get... I can imagine myself wanting to get into social issues, social critique, and simultaneously into a very gritty presentation of what a battlefield could actually look like, even though I haven't been at a battlefield, so I'm talking out of my butt again. But trying to use my imagination to come up with the, what you would say, the behavior and the circumstances that would be truly horrifying in a war. And then yet again, I think I'm ruling out kids, toddlers, tweens, whatever, and maybe be more focusing on the late teen to young adult, because I can think that, and I can imagine that the action-packed story would be more eventful and more impactful in that sort of audience. That's just being presumptuous, I guess, but it's sort of how you gotta use stereotypes in order to market your performance and your ideas. But I think that, at least if I pull from my own experience, that at least when I was, you know, between 15 and 18, I was very into action-packed stories, and I think that a war story, action story would probably fit within, you know, action-packed and full of, yeah, action overall. And I think I would have liked to read that when I was, you know, 18. Anyway, not much more I can say about that and elaborate upon that more than, you know, just making up stereotypes or confirming or offending anyone. So let's try and move on now, shall we, to what is arguably the most important question of them all that I already teased. And that is question number 5, which is how much enjoyment would I get out of creating something within this thematic? And that is a really good question. It's such a good question, and I'm even going to have a sip while I think about the answer. Now, I believe that I would get much of... When I say enjoyment, by the way, I don't mean like, ha ha ha, laughter enjoyment. I think of enjoyment as fulfillment. I think I would have gotten a lot of enjoyment out of presenting what I imagine the circumstances of war to be. This people getting slaughtered and, you know, just treated like trash. People are no longer people. You can be within the group, but you're still just the individual, and you only think about yourself because, well, it's not any reason for you to connect to anyone else, because they're gonna die anyway. This is a battlefield. Have that realized for the character moving into the story, and then gradually trying to make them to move over to the other side, so to say, of this spectrum. I think that would be very fulfilling for me personally, and really letting me be creative in the way that I'm describing these horrible conditions. Would it be the thing that I would be most interested in writing? It's hard to say, and that's also one of the reasons why I'm making this project. But I definitely think this idea of banding together in a captured scenario, bringing together a group of people who find themselves to make a better group than the nations that they necessarily are part of, would be a very compelling story to tell, and a very compelling story and lesson to sort of leave behind for the reader after they are done. This would probably be executed in a much better way, but I would say on a scale from like 1 to 10, I would say that I would get to like a strong 8.6-7 out of 10. Of enjoyment and fulfillment out of this, just because of that sort of gory impact I could have on describing the battlefield itself and this movement. There are certainly ideas of how to expand the physical confinement and telling short little stories here and there as well, in order to sort of expand the world. That would also be very fulfilling, because I could utilize different genres in order to tell those specific stories, could throw in some horror, and wow, haven't we touched upon horror yet? We're gonna do that later on, but that's also a way for me, who is not that big on horror. I think it's horrible, and I'm very easily scared. I think that a war story would be a very grounded way for me personally to sort of introducing horror and tragedy in a way that would fit my style of, what you would say, not writing necessarily, but my style of creativity and my style of presumptuous stereotypes, in a way that would probably paint a picture, so to say, of these what you would say themes, without me having to get too into it, because that would just be scary for me. Even though one can argue that war is a horror and a horrific experience in and within itself, which it absolutely is, but you might not necessarily need to convey it in that much detail and try to leave it up to the reader. I don't really know how I would go about it exactly, but I think that would be a good way to blending some different genres that I'm generally afraid of writing about, because I don't want to get too into it, because I will, just make myself scared and won't be able to get sleep, which could be a potential problem in this genre as well. Let me just lower the the scale again, so the enjoyment and fulfillment I would get. Let's lower that to a solid 8 out of 10. Yeah, let's do that. Have a nice one, mates, though, because this is the end of this video. I will be coming at you next with what I believe to, I can actually double check this to be exactly, let me see my to-do list, drama and tragedy tomorrow. Speaking about tragedy and drama, we will be getting into that with the exact same questions tomorrow. So have a nice one, mates, and I'll see you tomorrow with that video. I think I've said that like 1,000 times. See you.